My favorite thing about Namba was just how sweet he was, and how excited he always got when you had snacks, especially with encounters with our guests. And I connected to him most through giving him different enrichment items, and giving him puzzles and things for him to try to find food in his yard. It was always very fun watching him get very excited to find all the sweet snacks that I gave him.
I think my favorite thing about Namba was getting to greet him every day and how excited he was to see me. And what made me be able to connect with him was just caring for him every day, especially in his last days.
Let's see, Namba. Namba's always a hard one because he was a hard loss. But probably my favorite memory is the kids' reaction as we were doing the encounters because of that. The way he eats and he vacuums it, and the kids would all get, oh my goodness. And the one day in particular where Grandpa had his grandson there, and the grandson seemed to enjoy it so much, Grandpa had to have spent well over $20 giving his grandson encounters with Namba, and the grandson was enjoying it, and of course, Namba was enjoying his grapes. So we all had a win with that one, and we all chuckled.
Namba, our beautiful sloth bear, was just amazing. So my favorite thing about him was the encounters. He would run over when he saw us getting ready for the public encounters, and he would sit drooling by the fence waiting for the next guest. He would just sit there kind of huffing to himself and letting all this drool out of his mouth until we got the next person up to feed him. I only really got to work with Namba infrequently for public encounters, but he was such an amazing bear and just very, very interesting to watch, very personable.
My favorite thing about Namba was his fun and goofy personality. I loved coming in the mornings when opening up Asia and feeding his AM diet and watching him eat it as he slurped it up. I also loved that he kind of waited for keepers to come over to see them as well. One of the ways that I was able to connect through or with him was being able to see him in the mornings or in the evenings whenever I was able to actually go over and work with him. He was also a very calm bear, which allowed me to get comfortable with him as well and opened my eyes to how great sloth bears are.
So Shada was a wonderful old toad, and my favorite thing about her was I loved caring for her, especially on feeding days. She would start out kind of sleepy and uninterested in you, but when she realized there was a cricket on the other end, or an insect of some kind on the tongs, she would open her eyes really, really big and sometimes even make little sounds and then eat heartily. Although she was a retired ambassador the whole time I've been here, she was wonderful to care for, and because she was so often buried, which is normal for her species, guests loved when she made an appearance and kind of popped out of the dirt with her big eyes and everything.
My favorite thing about Shada was that she was a really fierce predator in a teeny tiny little package. I felt so connected to her whenever I was hand feeding her crickets, and she would take them right off the tongs from me.
My favorite thing about Holly was that she was always ready to help. If you were cleaning in her exhibit, she would come up and try to grab the broom from you or the rake and the shovel, and it always just seemed like she was ready to clean up her own mess. And what really made me feel connected to her was just how out of all of the kangaroos, she was the one who would approach you, she was the one who would sniff you, she would follow you around, and she really, out of all of them was the most personable.
My favorite thing about Chevy was his personality. He had a very cheerful personality and was also welcoming towards keepers. He would come up to keepers at times and present hoppers, which was part of his diet, as well as crickets that he would find around the flight. And that is what also made me feel connected with him as well, because I worked with him quite a bit during his time here.
My favorite thing about Chevy was just how personable he was, and that's also really what made me feel connected to him. He would always follow me around when I was walking around his exhibit. He would jump on my shoes, he would present me with a mouse that I gave him to feed, and he just really liked people.
Chevy was the most personable bird that I've ever worked with. He was smart, curious, and confident. I could always count on him to untie my shoes for me. And I will think of him every time I go into the MOA flight.
My favorite thing about Kermit were her eyes. She had the most beautiful, swirling eyes, and I just loved it whenever I got the chance to see her awake and moving. I felt that was such a special moment whenever I got to see her hunt.
So my favorite thing about Kermit was how the children would marvel at her sticky feet during programs. So although she had branches to perch on during the programs I worked with her on, she would stick to the plexiglass most of the time of that temporary carrier and delight all who saw her. So my connection to Kermit was as an ambassador animal. We worked closely to educate people about amphibians and other topics such as deforestation. I was also able to take care of her during my share of animal care work.
My favorite thing about Jafar was watching him go and explore and seeing like how smart he was as he would explore his exhibit. And the connection that I had with him, I think, was definitely built just watching him explore, and like the intelligence that you could just see as he would move around almost felt more like a cat than a bird to me.
So Nagini was our large boa constrictor, and my favorite thing about her was she was so big and charismatic. During programs, she would be really, really still when you were talking, and then start moving around, being interested in things, or stick her tongue out smelling things, and she would startle people who thought she wasn't real. I got a lot of questions of why isn't she moving, and then she would move. I worked with her closely as an ambassador animal in programs and also as part of the animal care work I am able to do.
My favorite thing about Nagini was just how good an ambassador she was for her species and for snakes in general. Whenever we were doing a program together, the kids really seemed to love her. She was an absolute rock star, and I think she changed a lot of minds and hearts about what a snake is and how you can feel connected to them.
Zoli, I had read about the Siamangs with their vocalizations, and I was really concerned when hoping that he and Violet would get along. And the first time I heard them after Violet was there, and I heard them singing together, it just lifted my heart, and I said, okay, Zoli and Violet are okay. They're singing together.
My favorite thing about Zoli was hearing his beautiful voice when he was caroling with Violet. He had the higher pitched, higher call, and I just loved hearing that whenever they were calling together. And I think what helped me connect with him the most was our training sessions that we would do every day. Being able to be there, ask him for behaviors, and him responding to me was really special.
My favorite thing about Zoli was building a connection / trust with him. He is was the first larger primate species that I was able to work with. He had quite a personality, which I loved about him as well. Something that helped me connect to him more was having the opportunity to build trust with him by him letting me give him snacks through the mesh in a very calm manner, and him allowing me to be in his presence overall.
My favorite thing about working with Sully was just seeing how kind and sweet he could be with Raya and with Violet. And I think my connection with him especially was built just over time through training and working with him, and definitely seeing our trust and connection going both ways over time as he got used to me and got to know me.
Flatback, our black-footed ferret, was so polite when he would wait until we fed him. So previously, all of our ferrets have been very food-driven, and they'll run to the door when you're ready to feed them. But he would wait politely. We could place the food, and then we could close the door before he would move. And then he would go off to get his food all happily. He really was interactive with enrichment and the public. He was very active for a normally nocturnal animal. And although he was not a classroom ambassador, I still did educational ambassador chats outside of his habitat and was able to care for him on my turn of the animal care, which was really nice because they're such a rare mammal and they're so cool to work with.
I have a couple of things that are a favorite of mine with Penelope's. One was that she was a good mom to all of her calves, and two is that over time I was able, as well as other keepers, were able to build up a trusting relationship with her in order to get her to shift inside on a more regular basis. That was really nice. She'd also come up to the fence and take alfalfa from our hands, which also took some time as far as trying to gain her trust and such. This is also the way that I felt most connected with Penelope.
Getting to work with her was one of the highlights of my career, and she taught me a lot about patience and how rewarding it could be when you gain an animal's trust, especially once we got to that level, and then she had a Kamalu, and that sort of carried over into him. And so, really proud moment. I'm going to miss her a lot.
A good memory I have of Penelope is she was playing with the cranes, or maybe harassing them, but she was running from the north end of her pasture towards the cranes. The cranes were standing up and flapping their wings when she got close, and she'd turn around and run back, and then she'd run back at them. And I could almost hear her giggling as she was running away from them.
Sonny was a really special boy, especially to me. I know you're not supposed to have your favorites, but he was definitely my favorite cat that I have ever gotten to work with. And I'm glad I could be there for him in the end. He taught me a lot about patience and just how different animals could be as individuals. I'll miss his little happy bunny hops when he would come in to eat in the evening, and just how he'd like to lay out in the sun. And he was overall a good boy, and I'm definitely gonna miss him.
My favorite thing about Asani was his personality. He was timid, yet brave. His brother was always the bigger one, the noisier one, which made him seem braver. But when it came to investigating new things like enrichment, Asani was always the first. I spent a lot of time with Asani over the years waiting on him, whether it was when he was eating or waiting on him to shift inside. So he taught me a lot of patience. He was one to enjoy the moment, whether it was savoring his diet or enjoying basking in the sun. And I appreciated that about him.
My favorite thing about Asani was just how smart he was. He always knew exactly what he wanted and what you wanted, and when those things didn't align, he could be a little bit too smart for his own good, even when it gave us trouble. That was definitely what helped to connect me to him, was just trying to work with him and trying to outsmart him some days, and sometimes just giving him into his desires when he wanted to lay in the sun or didn't want to come over and participate in training that day because he was just enjoying himself too much under his bench laying in the sun.
My favorite thing about Sniffy was coming in the morning during the summer hours to give him his breakfast. I would have to wake him up by kind of tapping on his crate to let him know it was time to get up, and I loved watching him yawn and get up slowly and go out into his yard and eat his meal. And that is also how I feel connected with him as well, since I worked with him during the summers mostly. It was nice.
My favorite thing about Sniffy the Anteater was he was such a character during behind-the-scenes encounters. He would get really excited and drool occasionally when people were there to feed him during these encounters. I'd always remember how insistently he would push his nose into your hand to make sure he got all of the peanut butter offered. I mostly knew him through behind-the-scenes encounters and camp walks, or any kind of walking through the zoo when he felt to be outside.
My favorite thing about Sniffy was watching him eat. He was extremely messy, and he loved to toss his food bowl around his stalls, get it all over the walls and floors, and then lick it up from there. And what really made me feel connected to him was being able to do behind-the-scenes opportunities with guests for him, and watching them have that kind of connection where they fed him peanut butter through a fence, and felt his tongue, touch their fingers, and just watching them connect with him really made me realize just how special he was.